Nora Thompson had inherited the bookstore from her grandfather, a quiet, genteel man who believed in the power of the written word. For him, books were more than just printed pages bound together. They were vessels of untold stories, bridging continents and lifetimes. When she was a child, Nora spent countless afternoons perched on a stool, listening to her grandfather read from well-worn classics or recite poems by candlelight when the electricity flickered out. She had come to love that bookstore and its cozy nooks, and though she grew up, moved away, and tried her hand at the wider world, she never truly left those memories behind. When her grandfather passed, it felt inevitable that she would return to that little corner on Maple Street. The sign above the door, painted in hues of maroon and gold, still read Thompson and Co. Books, just as it had for decades. Although the & Co. had once hinted at a larger consortium, the bookstore had always been a family affair, and now it fell squarely on her shoulders. Nora was not a natural extrovert, but she was far from being a recluse. She loved people in a quiet way, noticing the small details most others overlooked. The nervous tics of a new mother, the sparkle in the eye of a retiree recalling a dazzling time of youth, the gentle bickering of long-time married couples who, underneath it all, were bound by deep affection. Those first months were full of changes. Many of her grandfather's regulars, becoming older themselves, had stopped visiting. Some new high-rise apartments in town brought in a different crowd, young professionals who hurried past, often too occupied with their phones to step inside. Nora kept the store tidy, ran clearance sales, and tried enticing signs in the window. Yet foot traffic remained sparse. The shelves became dustier by the week, and Nora feared soon she might have to face the reality of emptying them for good. In the quiet evenings, she wondered what her grandfather would have done. She recalled how, in times of slow business, he'd point to the battered display copy of Dickens or Shakespeare and say, "If you want people to come, you have to invite them to share stories." As autumn approached, an idea gradually took form. She remembered how a friend of hers once hosted a poetry slam at a cafe, and in the process, strangers left as newfound allies. Why not do something similar here in the bookstore? But not just a simple reading. She wanted a gathering that emphasized oral storytelling, that revived the old spirit of sitting around a hearth, spinning yarns late into the night. Something magical happened in those moments when people listened to one another in hushed reverence. The question remained, would anyone actually come? She made neat little flyers and pinned them on the community bulletin board, posted a small announcement on social media, and taped a notice to her front window. "Join us for Midnight Tales," the sign read. "Nightly storytelling events every weekend. Bring a friend or just yourself and prepare to be captivated." Despite the marketing push, she prepared herself for disappointment on the inaugural night. The clock approached 9, and Nora sat on a stool behind the old wooden counter, a small circle of chairs arranged in the reading alcove. She reminded herself that dreams, like seeds, sometimes take a while to grow. Still, her heart thudded in her chest. At 9:15, the bell above the door jingled, and a nervous-looking man poked his head in. "Is this the, Midnight Tales thing?" he asked, voice quiet. "Yes," she said, perhaps a bit more enthusiastically than she intended. "Come in, you're the first one here." His name was Connor, and he worked for a tech startup around the block. He admitted he had no idea what to expect. Shortly after, an older couple appeared, then a college student with dark-rimmed glasses, and by 9:45, 7 people were seated in the circle. The bookstore lights dimmed to a soft glow. Nora welcomed them as best she could. Reading from a small note card, she explained that the event could be anything they made it. They could share a personal anecdote, a folk tale, or read a snippet from a favorite book. Immediately, she feared they might find the concept awkward, but Connor volunteered to start. He cleared his throat and told a story about how, as a boy, he got lost at a county fair. He explained in halting detail his fear, the swirling crowds, and the overwhelming relief when a neighbor recognized him and walked him back to his parents. It wasn't a grand tale, but It was earnest, and somehow in the telling, everyone relaxed into the moment. The night unfolded organically. The older couple, Sam and Eliza, recounted how they first met at a swing dance in the 1950 cess, how Sam showed up in bright green suspenders she called the most hideous article of clothing ever invented. Laughter punctuated each story, and after an hour, few were left silent. Nora was amazed. A sense of kinship, even among strangers, emerged from the circle like a soft flame that lighted the room. By the time midnight did come, no one wanted to leave. As Nora flicked off the front lights and locked the door, she smiled to herself, realizing her grandfather had been right. Sometimes you simply have to invite people to share. The success of the first night astounded her. Word spread, slowly but steadily. For the next gathering, a few more chairs were filled. Some people brought snacks or coffee thermoses as though settling in for an intimate campfire. Now, naming it Midnight Tales felt more than just a marketing angle. It was a promise of something worth staying up for, a moment to recall that each of us has a story worth telling. Nora would wander the circle, discreetly placing cushions behind chairs, passing out tea and listening quietly, often with a warming cup in her own hands. One evening, a woman named Josephine arrived, hesitant and uncertain. Nora noticed her anxieties immediately. The subtle way she fidgeted with her coat zipper, the darting glances around the store. Josephine settled in a corner seat, arms folded protectively over her chest. As the stories began, she didn't volunteer anything, but halfway through a comedic tale from another attendee, Nora spotted the trace of a smile on Josephine's lips. It wasn't forced or polite. It was the smile of someone remembering something joyous or hopeful, even fleeting. By the night's end, she mustered courage to speak. She told a fragmented story of how she used to love dancing alone in her living room, late at night, while her parents watched in amused acceptance. It had been years since she danced for joy, she admitted, because life, bills, responsibilities, heartbreak made her forget that unbridled feeling. The group listened with soft compassion, and by the time the clock chimed midnight, Josephine seemed lighter. Nora didn't say much, but she walked Josephine to the door, gave her a gentle hug, and whispered, "If you ever want to share more, we're here to listen." Josephine nodded, tears in her eyes, and stepped out into the chill darkness. The bookstore evenings continued, each one weaving an ever denser tapestry of camaraderie. Connor, who had once seemed so timid, became surprisingly talkative. He began each session by sharing an anecdote from his daily life, usually something comedic that made the crowd chuckle. Sam and Eliza brought homemade cookies on more than one occasion, and a handful of students from the nearby college drifted in, drawn by the lore of a small, inclusive community. Sometimes the stories were uproariously funny, tall tales about long road trips, comedic mishaps during first dates, or bizarre encounters with neighbors. Other times they were raw with heartbreak. One woman tearfully admitted she was estranged from her sister and feared she might never reconcile. Another shared a deeply personal account of losing his father, the heartbreak and regret heavy in his words. Throughout all these moments, the group rallied around the speaker in unspoken solidarity. Nora found her own purpose quietly shifting. She had once worried about the bookstore's financial future. Now, though finances still flickered at the back of her mind, her focus rested on the sense of refuge the store provided. Once lonely shelves suddenly resonated with the energy of the nights. People began showing up during the day, too, curious about the whispered rumors of heartfelt gatherings under the dim lamp. They bought books, rummaged through the fiction section, and left with more than a paperback they carried in anticipation of belonging. It was a gentle transformation, but it proved real. The old wooden floors creaked under the weight of new footsteps, and the quiet corners seemed alive with hushed conversations between strangers, turned friends. Over time, the ritual of storytelling took on an almost sacred glow. Nora resisted turning anything into a spectacle, keeping the gatherings free and unstructured. She recognized that a big part of its charm was the lack of demands. No special membership, no admission fee, just a willingness to listen or speak. She added small touches, a table in the corner with leftover cookies, a pot of chamomile tea, scattered cushions for those who preferred the floor. The sense of closeness was palpable whenever evening fell and the lights dimmed. One night, a newcomer named Damien slipped into the bookstore at the last minute. He had the aura of someone who was used to passing by unnoticed, dark hoodie, eyes lowered, posture stiff. When introductions went around, he offered only a reluctant nod. It was a night of poetry sharing, with many reading verses from battered journals or well-loved anthologies. The group, many of whom had come to know each other well, sensed Damien's shyness and gave him space. He listened, eyes flickering with curiosity, until eventually Nora asked if he wanted to share. At first, he shook his head, but as the stories and poems went on, something changed. Maybe it was hearing how another attendee spoke freely of losing her job, or how a soft-spoken man revealed a childhood dream of becoming an astronaut. By the night's midpoint, Damien cleared his throat, surprising everyone. "I wrote something," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not very good, but—" He trailed off, fishing a torn piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Haltingly, he read a poem about feeling invisible, about how the city's lights and hustle sometimes drowned out the delicate voices of people who felt they had no place. It was raw, a piece shaped by loneliness, but with a glimmer of hope for human connection. When he finished, there was a hush, a moment of silent understanding. Then the group's applause was gentle and sincere. It was as if in that moment a crack appeared in Damien's shell. He gazed around the circle, his breathing unsteady, yet with the faint beginnings of relief in his eyes. He didn't say much that night beyond reading his poem, but he returned the following weekend, this time with a new piece. Each evening he grew a bit bolder, offering more of himself, and in turn the group enveloped him with acceptance. After a few weeks, Nora heard him laughing with Connor over something trivial, two near strangers bonding like old friends. Watching this unfold was, for her, a testament to the gentle alchemy that occurs when guarded souls feel safe enough to emerge. During another session, someone proposed a special project, a group storytelling exercise. Rather than each person sharing individually, they would craft a collective tale, with each participant adding a scene or a character. They started it one Friday, a handful of them weaving a spirited fantasy about a magical forest. The story kicked off with Sam describing a crystal-laden cavern. Then Josephine introduced a mischievous sprite, while Damien added a lost traveler with a complicated quest to save his village. Over the next few nights, they continued the story every time they gathered. People jumped in, adding details about hidden paths, secret curses, and triumphant rescues. It became an adventure that tied them all together, their creativity merging into one narrative. Nora never had to do much orchestrating because it took on a life of its own. She watched with quiet wonder as unlikely friendships blossomed from shared imagination. Josephine and Damien stayed back after one session to discuss plot lines. Connor drew a map of their fictional world and pinned it on the bookstore's community board, and even passersby showed interest. Soon, the group's synergy spilled outside the bookstore walls. A few members arranged a weekend picnic at the local park, open to anyone who had heard about Midnight Tales. Over baskets of fruit and sandwiches, they laughed about everything, from Eliza's scorn for Sam's cooking to Connor's comedic attempts at drawing. Strangers embraced each other as though they'd found long-lost family. That picnic day cemented for Nora that something miraculous had sprouted, something beyond just selling books or hosting a series of events. It was a community. Still, there were struggles along the way. A rumor circulated that the bookstore was merely a therapy group in disguise, prompting some cynics online to poke fun. One person wrote an insulting comment on the store's social media page. "Why pay for group therapy when you can go to Maple Street and cry into a paperback for free?" For a few days, Nora worried that such flippant cruelty might scare people away. She even considered canceling the gatherings, fearing the sense of intimacy might be ridiculed on a larger scale. But then she remembered her grandfather's words again. He never cowered from skepticism. He faced it with dignity and calm. So she kept going, resolved that the good it brought far outweighed a few mocking words. Indeed, the cynics didn't deter the regulars. If anything, attendance grew. College students stressed by exams stumbled in, curious retirees seeking fresh connections showed up, and local office workers searching for a break from monotonous routines arrived with cautious optimism. In that bookstore, an indescribable acceptance existed. You could walk in feeling hollow, anxious, even hopeless, and you would walk out comforted by the knowledge that you were not alone. As the months passed, the circle expanded so much that Nora had to move extra shelves aside to accommodate all the chairs. She considered the possibility of turning the front display area into a more permanent meeting space, but for now, everyone liked the sense of huddling amidst the books themselves, as if the thousands of stories lining the shelves offered silent support. Sometimes they would pull down random volumes for inspiration, reading an especially beautiful passage or riffing on a chapter. Many nights, they closed the circle with a quiet reflection, each person expressing one thing they were grateful for. Josephine, who had once been so plagued by sadness, now often shared joyous updates about her foray back into dancing. She'd joined a local rec center class and in time gained enough confidence to invite a friend from the group to watch one of her small recitals. Damien had found a part-time job at an arts co-op, largely thanks to a friend he made during Midnight Tales who introduced him to the organization. To everyone's delight, he started selling chapbooks of his poetry. Sam and Eliza brought in an old family recipe for bread pudding one night, warming the entire space with its sweet, comforting smell. Even Connor, the hardworking tech guy, revealed that he had found a new calling in teaching basic coding skills to younger kids, discovering that talking to them about problem solving was not unlike sharing stories. It was all about communication and empathy. In the midst of this, Nora felt an internal renewal. Her shy modesty gave way to a quiet confidence in her purpose. She no longer worried obsessively about paying the bills or watching the store's sales. Customers were coming now, drawn by the bookstore's reputation for warmth. She saw how opening the door to people's stories brought the entire community closer and, in turn, supported the shop's livelihood. Whenever she spotted someone uncertainly glancing through the window, she would step right up to welcome them in. She never pushed them to buy anything or even speak if they didn't want to. She simply wanted them to feel welcome. In an age of endless distractions, Thompson and Co. books felt like a refuge. As the crisp winter mellowness set in, the gatherings continued. The nights started earlier and darkness settled quickly outside. Against that frigid backdrop, the bookstore glowed like a lantern, standing out amid the deserted sidewalks. If you peered through the glass after 9 p.m., you would see a tight circle of chairs, a rotating cast of people leaning forward, engaged with all their hearts. You would see the reflection of lamplight on bookshelves and, more importantly, the reflection of hope and unity in the eyes of people who had, until recently, believed themselves alone. One evening, close to the holidays, snow swirled outside, layering the street in hushed gray. Conditions were too treacherous for many to drive, but a small handful braved the weather. Nora had brewed a large pot of peppery chai tea that filled the room with its spicy aroma. 8 people showed up, stomping snow off their boots, cheeks reddened by the cold. They formed a half circle near the old radiator, warming their hands against steaming mugs. Despite the smaller turnout, the atmosphere was intimate and lovely. They took turns telling holiday-themed stories, cherished memories from childhood, comedic fiascos of family dinners gone awry, heartfelt recollections of someone special who was no longer around to share the season. One young doctor, Ellie, spoke about the first holiday she spent away from home on a volunteer mission in a small village. She had never felt more grateful for the tiny kindnesses people showed her, like giving her a homemade quilt to ward off the mountain chill. Damien read a new poem about the contrast between the cold outside and the warmth of human connection. Josephine quietly described visiting her grandmother's house every Christmas to prepare fresh-baked cinnamon rolls, a tradition that ended when her grandmother passed. Despite the sadness, she found a certain joy in sharing those memories, because in remembering, the grandmother lived on in a small way. Throughout it all, Nora sat with a sense of boundless gratitude. The group asked if she had a story of her own to share. She hesitated at first, unsure if she should speak of private memories with her grandfather. But then she realized how far they had all come and felt a stir of courage. Quietly, she told them about the early days, the times when her grandfather would read fairy tales by candlelight, how she had once fallen asleep curled into his old leather armchair, listening to a story about fairies and knights. She recalled the lull of his voice, the comfort of knowing she was safe and cared for in that modest bookstore. People listened intently. A gentle hush followed, and without notice, tears gathered in her eyes. She wasn't ashamed of them. She let them glimmer as a testament to love and legacy. The group nodded supportively, some smiling through their own tears. It felt like the circle had completed itself, for Nora had shared her root story, the seed that had sprouted everything they experienced now. When midnight approached, they left the little bookstore, trudging through the snow. The street lamps glowed down on them, and the hush of the city's nighttime presence cradled their camaraderie. Some parted ways toward apartments or houses. Others lingered in small clusters, chatting softly under the streetlights. For Nora, it felt like a cinematic moment, a swirl of snow, well-worn boots, and hearts brimming with a kindness that brightened the cold night. And she knew in that instant that the bookstore had become so much more than a business venture. It was a sanctuary of understanding and acceptance, where daily anxieties melted away in the face of human warmth. In the following weeks, more new faces arrived, and each meeting seemed to add another thread to the tapestry. Among them was a high school English teacher who ended up collaborating with Damien on a poetry workshop for teens. A local librarian joined the group and offered to share leftover library materials for their gatherings. The stories continued, each unique, each a tiny testament to courage. Small gestures, someone offering a ride home, another bringing a homemade loaf of bread, a hug given spontaneously underscored the sense of genuine unity within those walls. Months rolled on. The battered sign reading Thompson and Co. book still hung out front, as lovingly maintained as ever by Nora, but passers-by now also noted a small handwritten plaque by the entrance. Midnight tales held here, come in and belong. For some, it was a beacon, a hint of possibility in a society that often felt distanced and weary. Even people who didn't come inside might pause, consider the sign, and find a kernel of hope in it. Those who did venture in rarely regretted it. Night after night, the crocheted blanket of community grew, its pattern shaped by the threads of real human connections. It was as if Nora had taken the invisible cracks that run through a city, those hidden chasms that keep individuals isolated, and patched them with stories, crocheting everyone together. She never made a fuss or grand statements about what they were doing. She simply opened the door, turned down the lights, set out chairs, and asked, "Who wants to share tonight?" Some nights, the chairs overflowed and the energy crackled like a festival. Other nights, just a handful gathered, speaking in hushed tones as if they were old family around a winter hearth. Yet in each instance, as they locked up the store at midnight, there was a shared reluctance to leave, to let the moment dim. The city outside might be fast-paced and nearly anonymous, but in the bookstore's glow, people felt recognized, heard, even cherished. With time, other businesses in the neighborhood started coming alive too, each adopting small communal touches. The bakery added a weekly bread-making class. The coffee shop dedicated a corner to local artists' paintings, and a record store held casual listening parties. Whether subconsciously or by direct inspiration from Thompson and Co. books, something in the community had shifted toward openness. Strangers were less suspicious of each other, more likely to say hello on the street, and the lines between neighbor, patron, and friend blurred. On the anniversary of her grandfather's passing, Nora quietly opened the store as usual, adjusting the window display with fresh books. That evening, she read an especially poignant poem in his memory before the group. Halfway through the reading, her voice trembled. She looked around the circle of faces. Sam, Eliza, Josephine, Damien, Connor, and many others. All those testimonies of heartbreak and hope had woven them together, and now, in her moment of vulnerability, they were there for her. The reassurance was palpable. When she finished reading, the group applauded softly. Someone reached over to squeeze her hand. Walking home that night, she felt a deep peace. A cold wind blew, whipping her hair against her cheeks. But she didn't care. She recalled how, as a little girl, she used to believe that stories were magic, that they possessed the power to make invisible bonds visible. Now, as an adult, she saw evidence of that magic in front of her eyes. She, too, had found healing through these gatherings. She, too, felt less lonely, more connected to her grandfather's spirit, and anchored in a community that loved simpler, truer things. And as she climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the store, a single light in the window guiding her to bed, she smiled at the memory of that first uncertain night. How few people had shown up, and how daunting it felt to begin. Yet from that tenuous seed, something beautiful had blossomed, something that was still growing. All around Maple Street, the world carried on. Lights flickered in the rows of houses, cars rolled by, newspapers landed on doorsteps. But beneath that routine, behind the doors of Thompson and Co. Books, hearts were unfolding like pages in a beloved novel. The building itself breathed with the hush of words shared in confidence, of laughter echoing beneath the shelves, of tears wiping away sorrow so that hope might take its place. In that unique space, time slowed long enough for people to truly see one another. And sometimes that was all anyone really needed, to be seen, heard, and folded into a circle of stories as midnight came and went.